This lovable, rootable young man who everyone wanted to see succeed, and a lot still do, has become to some degree like this walking contradiction.
The brand is shit. It makes Paddy look like a cheap sellout.
And you think that you just cracked the code, and you advertise the code to the world because you're the one that figured it out. You're a little bit stupid.
Paddy the Baddy Pimblett is the most polarizing fighter in the UFC today.
Paddy was once virtually loved by everybody.
Before coming to the UFC, Paddy made waves in Cage Warriors down in the UK, and once he came to the UFC, people were hyped for his debut. What's not to love with Paddy the Baddy? He's got the funny accent, he's got the funny hair, and he loves to eat and get fat and then cut all that weight to fight.
He's got star power. You can't ask for much more out of a UFC fighter.
Making his debut, he looked like he had the total package, and he delivered. He came in with a flashy knockout and an even flashier post-fight interview. He went over there, called Michael Bisping a lizard, called Instagram lizards, told him to give him his account back, said that he was a scouser, he didn't get knocked out, no ifs, ands, or buts, just absolutes. And Paddy the Baddy made waves, got the attention of the entire MMA world, and got the attention of one Dave Portnoy, who gave him $1 million contract to be the first sponsored athlete by Barstool.
His approach to social media was
seamless.
Paddy was able to come off as one of the boys.
He was able to humanize himself as a fighter and just got more love from the whole MMA world.
Paddy really took off after his win against Jordan Levitt. He came out and told his story of how his friend just recently had passed away from suicide, and he gave one of the greatest suicide prevention speeches in sports history.
I woke up on Friday morning to a message that one of my friends back home had killed himself.
And let's not discredit Paddy's fight that night. He came out, an electric crowd in the O2 Arena, his hometown, London. He had it bumping, and then he went out there, submitted Jordan Levitt. He got another finish, delivered once again, proving that the hype was real.
Things were looking up for Paddy. He was popping off on every platform, social media, TikTok, you name it.
The UFC was big on Paddy, the fans were big on Paddy, and it showed because he got a co-main event spot on UFC's pay-per-view, UFC 282.
And this is where Paddy became the baddie. People started to churn on Paddy when he first released his drink, claiming it to be better than Logan Paul's when it looked like he just ripped off Logan's prime.
It was a bad look for Paddy, and it only continued to look worse as he called out Jake Paul next, claiming that his fights were rigged. Jake then offered Paddy $1 million to spar him, and it never happened. Both sides made excuses, and both guys came off looking bad for not taking the fight, taking the spar. And a lot of fighters, a lot of the public, and even the betting odds favored Jake Paul in that fight.
Then things really began to heat up once his own boss, Dana White, in a podcast basically kissed his ass for being such a great boss. And then he ragged on one of Dana White's enemies, Ariel Helwani.
Paddy started to rub MMA fans the wrong way, and he definitely rubbed Ariel the wrong way. Ariel came back at him hard. He came back with receipts showing that Paddy texted him, DM'd him, asking to be on his show. That just proved that Paddy was two-faced, sucking up to Dana White while also being on Ariel's good side, and it just wasn't panning out for Paddy. And on top of that, Paddy's manager asked Ariel for money to interview Paddy when Paddy was the one that asked to go on Ariel's show, which is insane.
It wasn't a good look for Paddy, and Paddy still hasn't been able to recover from it. His reputation in the UFC has gone down the tubes.
Leading up to the fight, Paddy's stock and his character started to drop, and then once we got to fight night, his stock as a fighter started to drop too.
In UFC 282, he went up against Jared Gordon.
Jared Gordon is an unranked nobody, a 145er moving up to 155 just to fight Paddy. So much smaller than Paddy, so much less skilled than Paddy. This should have been a layup for an easy Paddy finish.
It's an ugly fight.
Boring fight.
Paddy wasn't able to get the job done, but in the end, they still awarded him the victory.
A controversial victory at that. A lot of people, a lot of experts, the public, pretty much everyone thought Paddy lost that fight. But nonetheless, Paddy came away with a very controversial victory, which ensued boos from the crowd.
The hype for Paddy has died down to levels of we just don't know if Paddy is going to be able to recover from it.
Paddy has went from basking in people's love to embracing the hate. After the fight, he called his fight of the night, knowing it was the most boring fight on the card. He made a joke about paying for the post-fight interview. He called anyone idiots that said that he lost the fight. He said it was a clear victory. Paddy is just going full heel now.
Is it deserved, though? Because Paddy the Baddy is going through that influencer cycle. You were discovered, now you're the most loved person in the world. Then something happens, and everyone churns on you in a dime, and you become the most hated man alive. And that's what it feels like for Paddy the Baddy, who's not a bad guy. He's done a lot of good for a lot of people. He's provided maybe the best entertainment for UFC in the past couple years.
For being a non-ranked fighter, to draw in that many eyeballs is a feat that very little people could do. People called him level below Conor McGregor in notoriety in just a matter of 2 fights in the UFC.
And when you really break down what has he done wrong, it pales in comparison to what he's done right. And I think people need to lay off Paddy in the hate they're giving him. Just because he won one controversial victory, I mean, just stepping in the ring and putting on a show, that's a tough thing to do. And it's not in his hands to take the victory or not. So I don't think the hate should be on Paddy. If anything, the hate should be on the UFC and allowing the judges to do something so blatant.
However, I will say this fight did expose Paddy as just being an entertainer rather than a fighter. Because if he was barely able to squeak out a victory against an unranked nobody, imagine what the top contenders in that division are going to do.
Yeah, I think Dana White needs to get him on steroids immediately if he wants a chance, because Paddy was exposed.
Listen, there's a lot of doubt, a lot of doubters of Paddy now. He can either backtrack, try to win the fans, or he can embrace that villain role and prove the doubters wrong. And knowing Paddy, knowing his attitude, I think we know which side he's going to be.
And remember, Paddy isn't getting paid like a Conor McGregor or a Floyd Mayweather. He's just starting to make the money. And I think this is what he needs. He needs to be the hated guy. He needs to be the villain. Something needed to happen for him. And I think this is a great opportunity for Paddy as a person, and I hope he gets what he deserves.
The more people talk about him, good or bad, the more money they're putting in his pockets.
They call him Paddy the Baddy for a reason. It's time to embrace being the villain.
If he cared about people loving him, he'd be called Paddy the Goody.
Doobie doobie doo, the Wentworth Bros.